"Whoever wrote this," she said, "should be flogged with his own quill." I had written it. I had written it 3 nights running, by a candle I kept relighting with my thumb because the servants had gone to bed, and I had been rather proud of the 4th clause. I did not say so. I was wearing an ink-stained coat 2 sizes too generous, borrowed off a clerk who was at that moment eating my supper in my chambers upstairs, and a scribe does not argue with an interpreter over a table in the copying room. A scribe reaches for another sheet of paper. So I reached for another sheet of paper. She was still reading. She read the way a stonemason taps a wall, a small sound, a pause, a small sound, listening for the hollow place. Her finger moved down the margin. Her mouth moved without noise around the northern words. Somewhere above us, in the great hall of Marin Gate, 2 of the strongest packs on the continent were being served roast goose off my grandmother's plate, and deciding, politely, how to divide my kingdom between them. Down here it smelled of ink, wet wool, and lamp oil. Down here I could hear things. "It isn't even badly written," she said, which stung more than the flogging. "It's badly trusted. Look here." She turned the page and set it in front of me, and her cuff dragged through a wet line and blotted it, and she didn't notice, and I decided in that instant that I liked her in the small, harmless way a man likes weather. "This is your clause. The road shall remain in the keeping of Corand. Good, plain. A child could hold you to it. Then what's the trouble? The trouble is what it becomes on the other side of the room." She pulled another sheet toward her, the Ostwald copy, the northern fair hand, thick black letters with their little iron serifs. "Their clerk renders keeping as Vartha. You'll have nodded at it. Everyone nods at Vartha. It's in the trade agreements, it's in the fishing rights, it means keeping, watching, minding. It means a shepherd minding a flock." "That sounds like what I want," I said. "Scribes are allowed to be slow." "It's exactly what you want if you're a shepherd." She looked up. She had gray eyes and a plain brown braid coming apart from a long day, and a smudge on her jaw where she'd propped her chin, and she looked at me with the flat patience of a woman who has explained the same thing to 4 fools before breakfast. "The flock isn't the shepherd's, sir. That's the whole point of the word. In the old northern form, the one their oath will be sworn in, because it's a treaty, because it must be sworn in the old form, because that's what makes it binding. Vartha means to hold in keeping for another. You will stand up in front of 2 kingdoms and swear, in a language you don't speak, that you are minding your own road on behalf of somebody else." The candle guttered, I let it. "And in 10 years, she went on, when Ostwald wants the pass in fact and not in flattery, they will not need an army. They will need this page. They will hold it up. And every scholar in the north will say, quite honestly, that the king of Corand agreed to it in his own hand." Outside, up the stair, someone laughed at the high table. It carried down the stone the way sound does in that hall, my stone, my grandmother's plate. "You should tell someone," I said. "I have told someone, I've told 3 someones." She sat back. For the first time she sounded tired rather than sharp. "I told the chancellor's man who told me the chancellor doesn't take counsel from hired tongues. I told the head scribe who told me the king of Corand employs 6 translators and I am the cheapest of them, which is true. And I told the steward who asked me if I was quite sure, and I said yes, and he wrote it down on a list, and that list is on a table, and that table is in a room, and the door of that room is locked at night." She shrugged with one shoulder. "So now I've told you. You'll be copying it out fair tomorrow. Write it correctly and let them argue with the ink. And if they hang the scribe, then you'll have been hanged for the only useful thing you ever did," she said, "and I'll come and say something kind at the wall." I laughed. It came out of me before I decided to allow it, which had not happened in some years, and it startled her. Her eyebrows went up, and the sharpness fell off her face all at once. And underneath it she was younger than I'd taken her for and considerably more amused than she wanted to be. "What word would you use," I asked, "instead of Vartha?" "Ostanrath," she said. "Ugly, old. It means the thing a wolf will not let go of even when the jaw is broken." She said it a second time, more slowly, listening to it herself. "They'll fight it. It has no give in it. That's why I want it. And here is the thing I have never been able to explain to anyone since, though I have had years to try, and though the woman herself has explained to me at length what I ought to have felt and in what order. Nothing rose in me, nothing surged, nothing struck. My wolf did not leap up. It did the other thing, the small thing, it turned its head. The way a wolf turns in the dark when someone across the water says its name. I have heard 4 languages spoken since I was a boy. I have sat through years of them, the North's iron consonants, the South's soft honeyed vowels, the market pigeon of my own pass where all three grind together. And there is a moment when you are learning, when a language you have heard your whole life without understanding suddenly means something. The noise resolves, the door swings, and you are standing inside a room you have walked past 10,000 times. That was it. That is the closest I can come. She said an ugly old word about a wolf's broken jaw, in a copying room that smelled of lamp oil, and something I had heard my whole life without understanding finally meant something. I sat very still until it passed. It did not pass. "You've gone gray," she observed. "Have you eaten?" "Not since." "Sit down properly. There's bread in the cupboard behind you. It's the head scribe's. He counts it, but he won't count it tonight." She had already turned back to the pages, pen going, brisk. "Eat and then read this line back to me, because if I've got it wrong, I'd rather find out from you than from a king." So the Alpha King of Korand ate stolen bread in his own house at midnight, and read a line back to a woman who was, at that moment, saving his kingdom, and who thought she was doing it because he had a nice, slow voice and nothing better to do. Her name was Aveline. She was paid 4 coppers a day, and she slept in the alcove at the back of the scribe's room, and I would have said, if anyone had asked me that afternoon, that I knew everything worth knowing about my own gate city. I want to say why I was in that coat, because it sounds like vanity, and it wasn't. Korand is a small kingdom. We are 90 miles long and in the pinched middle 4 miles wide. We have no iron. We have no grain worth the name. What we have is the road, the only road, the one that goes up out of the golden south through the switchbacks, over the shoulder of the mountain at Marin Gate, and down into the iron north. Every bar of Ostwald steel that has ever reached a southern forge has come through my toll house. Every sack of Sarnholt wheat that has ever reached a northern table has gone out through my gate, past my bells. 2 great packs, 1 road, and in the middle for 11 generations my family holding it. My grandfather held it with a war, which cost him 4,000 wolves and a leg. My father held it with a marriage, which cost him rather more. I have held it for 19 years with paper, patience, and the single most valuable asset the crown of Korand possesses, which is this. Neither of them has ever troubled to learn my face. That is not a figure of speech. Havard of Ostwald has written to me 11 times. He has never once come to my hall. He sends his brother or his clerk, or in one memorable year his falconer. Corvin Sarn of the South has met me twice, both times at a distance of 30 feet, both times looking over my shoulder at the pass. To the great packs, the king of Korand is not a man. He is a toll gate that occasionally sends letters. They send envoys to my summit, and the envoys arrive expecting to be met by a fat provincial in a chain. And my chancellor, Pelin Ord, who is a fat provincial in a chain, and the shrewdest wolf in 3 kingdoms, meets them at the top of the stair with his arms open and his rings flashing, and they bow to him, and they do not ask, because asking would be admitting they didn't know. And I go downstairs. I have done it for 19 years. It is not a game. It is the only way a small king ever hears the truth. Up there in the good coat, every wolf in the room is talking to the crown. Down here in ink and wool, they are talking to each other, and what they say to each other is the treaty. The rest is calligraphy. That is what I was doing in the copying room on the eve of the summit. I was not slumming. I was working, and I had, until roughly the 9th hour of that evening, considered myself very good at it. Then a hired tongue with 4 coppers a day and a blot on her cuff had looked at my life's best work and told me it was badly trusted. She was right, of course. That's the part I keep coming back to. 19 years of patience, and Ostwald had beaten me with a preposition. They came up the road the next morning, both of them at once, which was itself a message. Ostwald first, out of the north gate at dawn, gray banners, iron-scaled cloaks, 300 wolves, and not one of them talking. Havard's brother Sten rode at the head with his helmet under his arm and snow still in the creases of his coat, and he looked up at my walls the way a man looks at a horse he intends to buy. Sarnholt came from the south an hour later and took twice as long about it. Gold and green, bells on the bridles, a train of gifts they made sure to unpack in the yard where everyone could count them. Oranges, 40 casks of southern wine, a pair of gray hunting dogs, a chest of silk that Corvin Sarn's daughter opened personally, in the sun with the entire garrison watching. Between them my 411 household wolves, my bells, my road. I watched the whole thing from a window in the scribe's gallery, standing beside a woman eating a heel of yesterday's bread. That's the wine that isn't a gift, Aveline said, chewing. Isn't it? 40 casks. Nobody drinks 40 casks in 6 days. It's the manifest they want. 40 casks come up the road, 40 casks are recorded at your toll house, and now there's a precedent in your own ledger for a southern train coming through this gate untaxed on the occasion of a treaty. She swallowed. There'll be another treaty. There's always another treaty. And in 40 years, a clerk in Sarnholt will find the ledger and say, look, the pass has always been open to us on ceremonial occasions. It's in Coran's own hand. You have, I said, a very poor opinion of everyone. I have a very good opinion of everyone, she said. I think they're all extremely clever. That's the problem. She brushed the crumbs off her front. The king ought to tax the wine. The king ought to tax the wine, I agreed. The king taxed the wine. Pellin sent word down at noon that the toll would be levied at the standard rate, ceremonial or not, and Corvin Sarn laughed for a full minute in the great hall and paid it, because a laugh is cheaper than an argument you'd lose, and because 40 casks of tax is nothing, and because he had not come here for the wine. He had come here for the 4th clause. They both had. That was what I had understood sitting in a copying room at midnight, watching a woman blot her own cuff, and what I had not understood for the 19 years before it. The North and the South were not fighting over my pass. They were agreeing over my pass. Somewhere between them, in the 6 months of letters that had led to this summit, they had quietly stopped being rivals about Corand and started being partners about Corand. The word Vartha was not a northern trap. It was in the southern draft too, in the southern hand, rendered in the honeyed southern form, meaning exactly the same thing. 2 great packs, 1 word, both of them shepherds, and my rode the flock. I went and put my head against the cold stone of the gallery wall for a while, and then I went back down to the copying room, because that is where the war was. There were 9 of us in that room over the 6 days that followed. 2 Ostwald clerks who worked like men chopping wood. 3 southern scribes who worked beautifully and slowly and stopped for lunch. Coran's own head scribe, Marrow, who was 70 and had been copying treaties since before I was whelped and who had the political instincts of a chair. A boy who mended pens. Myself in the coat. And Aveline at the end of the long table, under the bad window, with 4 coppers a day and the only clear head in the building. She was not the only interpreter. That is what I want understood. Corand employed 6. 2 of them were quite good. But the other 5 worked the way everyone works. They took the northern sentence and made a southern sentence that meant approximately the same, and everyone nodded and the work went on because that is what an interpreter is for. She did something else. She sat with a word for an hour. She would not let it past her until she knew where it had been. Why does it matter what it used to mean? The boy asked her once, mending a pen, honestly curious. Nobody talks like that. Because they'll swear in the old form, she said, not looking up. And the old form doesn't care what we've decided a word means since. The oath goes down into the root. If the root is rotten, the oath is rotten, and it doesn't matter one bit that everyone in this room was being polite about it. Nobody even speaks the old tongue, the boy said. Not properly. Marrow says it's dead. Marrow's right, she said, and turned the page. 6 nights. I have thought about those 6 nights more than any 6 years of my reign. Here is what happens to a king who takes off the coat and puts on a different one. Nobody performs for you. Nobody has ever not performed for me, not my council, not my captains, not the woman my father nearly married me to when I was 20. Every wolf who has ever spoken to a Merrick Ross has been speaking at the same time to the crown of Corand and adjusting and rounding off the edges and telling me the version. Aveline had no version. She was too tired for a version. At the 2nd hour of the morning, with the candles down to stubs, she would tell me exactly what she thought of the northern clerk's ablatives, and exactly what she thought of the southern lunch habit, and exactly what she thought of a king who employed 6 interpreters and could not be bothered to learn 20 words of the language his own oath would be sworn in. That's unfair, I said. It's completely fair. It's his oath. It's his mouth it comes out of. She dipped her pen. He'll stand up there and make a noise he doesn't understand, and 2 kingdoms will hold him to it, and afterward he'll be baffled. Men are always baffled. It's the national industry. You've never met him. I've met his handwriting, she said darkly. It's very confident. I laughed again. It kept happening. I had a reputation in my own hall for being a man who did not laugh. My captains called it the Ross Quiet and were rather proud of it, and it had been useful to me at more than one table. Down there, 6 nights running, it fell off me like a coat. She taught me the 20 words. I asked her to, I said, in the coat, that a scribe ought to know what he was copying, and she said that was the first sensible thing a scribe had ever said to her, and she pushed the candle to the middle of the table. The old tongue is an ugly language. I want that on the record because everyone who has never learned it thinks it must be beautiful. It is not. It is short and hard, and it does not decorate. It has one word for a promise and a different word for a promise you intend to keep, and the second word is longer because the old wolves were not sentimental, but they were honest. Ostanrath, she said that first lesson. Say it in your throat, not your mouth, your throat. Ostanrath. No, you said it like a southerner. You've put a little sigh on the end because you want me to like it. She said it again, and it came out of her like a stone going into a well, no give in it at all. It isn't asking to be liked, it's a jaw that won't open. Again. I said it again. I said it 30 times over 6 nights, and I never once said it correctly, and she never once let it go. And every night when she said it, my wolf turned its head. I did not tell her. What would I have said? I was a scribe with ink on my cuff, and more than that, I had begun, somewhere around the 3rd night, to be afraid. Not of the treaty. I had the treaty by then. I had Pellin working the northern clerk with wine and flattery, and I had the 4th clause rewritten in a hand nobody would recognize as mine, and I had the ugly word waiting like a knife under a napkin. I was afraid of the reveal, because at some point in the next 6 days, a man in a very good coat was going to stand up at the head of my own hall, and this woman was going to look up from her place below the salt and see the face of the scribe who had eaten her stolen bread and mispronounced her verbs, and let her talk for 6 nights about how the king of Korand was a confident idiot who couldn't be bothered to learn his own oath. Every hour I did not tell her made the telling worse. I knew that. I have negotiated with 2 great packs for 19 years. I know precisely what a compounding debt looks like. I sat in that room and watched the interest run, and I did not tell her, and I have never been able to decide since whether that was cowardice or the most honest thing I ever did, because I knew with a certainty I could not argue with that the moment she knew I would never hear the truth from her again. She would round the edges. Everyone rounds the edges. That is what a crown does to a room. I wanted 6 more nights of it, that is all. 6 more nights of a woman telling me I was wrong. The trouble found her on the 4th day, and it found her because she was right. Ostvald's chief clerk was a long, dry man named Ivar Skell, and Ivar Skell had been building the Vartha clause for 6 months, and Ivar Skell noticed on the 4th day that the Korand fair copy had come back from the copying room with the ugly word in it. He was very good, I'll say that. He didn't storm. He came down the stair with his hands behind his back and stood at the end of the long table and asked pleasantly in the market pigeon, who had made the emendation, and Marrow, 70 years old, political instincts of a chair, said, "The tongue did," and pointed at Aveline with his pen. Skell looked at her for a long moment. "You're the hired one," he said. "The Crow girl, no pack." "No pack," Aveline agreed. "Paid by the day." "By the day. And you've corrected a form that was agreed by the Crown's own delegation in the spring." He said it gently, almost with sympathy, and I watched the trap open under her feet with the polished silence of a well-made thing. "That's not a correction, is it? That's an alteration to a treaty document by a hired hand with no standing at night, alone in a locked room." He turned to Marrow. "I don't blame the girl. She's overreached. They do. But the Crown will want to know how a paid tongue with no pack came to be alone with the fair copy at all. And I'm afraid I'll have to ask the Chancellor that this evening. And I imagine the answer will be that she won't be alone with it again." Marrow was already nodding. That was the worst part. He was nodding and reaching for the sheet, because he was 70 and tired, and a Ostvald clerk had said the word Chancellor out loud. "She showed the emendation to me," I said. Everyone in the room looked at the scribe in the ink-stained coat. Skell's eyes went over me, the coat, the cuffs, the ink, the nothing, with the perfect indifference of a man reading a wall. "And you are?" "Nobody," I said, "but I copied it, so if it's an alteration, it's mine. She only told me what the word meant." I set my pen down. "She tells everyone what words mean. It's very tiresome. Ask the boy." "It is tiresome," the boy said from the pen bench with feeling. Skell stood there a moment longer. I watched him weigh it, a nobody scribe, a hired tongue, an old fool, a boy. 4 coppers a day. Nothing in this room worth the breath, and I watched him decide to take it upstairs after supper, when the Chancellor had had his wine, which was the correct decision and would have worked on any other night of my reign. "After supper, then," he said to Merrow, not to me, and went back up the stair. The room let out its breath. Aveline turned to me. She did not look grateful. She looked furious, which I have since learned is what she looks like when she is frightened for someone else. "Don't ever do that again," she said very quietly. "He'd have had you out by morning. He'll have you out by morning. I'm a tongue, I'll be a tongue in another hall next month. You're a Korand man with a Korand name, and you just told an Ostwald clerk that you altered a treaty in the dark." Her hands had gone flat on the table. "They hang scribes for that. They actually hang them. It's not a joke you make in a room. Nobody's hanging anybody. You don't know that, you don't know anything, you're a scribe." She stopped. She pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes for a second, and when she took them away she was steady again, and that steadiness cost her something I could see. "Why did you do it?" And I stood there in the coat, with the ugly word in the fair copy, and the pass safe, and 2 great packs eating my grandmother's goose over my head, and I could not think of one single thing to say to her that was true. "Because you were right," I said at last, "and nobody in this building was going to say so." She looked at me for a long moment. The bad window had gone blue behind her. It was very late. Somewhere up the stair, a hall full of powerful wolves was laughing at something. "That's not a reason," she said. "That's a habit, you'll die of it." "Probably," I said. "Don't," she said, and turned back to the page. And after a second she pushed the candle to the middle of the table, where we could both see by it, the way she had every night that week. 2 days until Oath Day. Pelin Ord came down to the copying room at the 2nd hour of the morning, which he had not done in 19 years, and stood in the doorway in his good chain, looking like a man who has been sent to fetch something out of a cellar he does not like. The room was empty but for me. Aveline had gone to the alcove an hour before with her boots still on. "Majesty," he said very low. "Don't." Skell came to me after supper. Pelin came in and shut the door and leaned his considerable weight against it, which is his way of saying that what follows is not for the corridor. He wants the interpreter dismissed before the oath. He was quite reasonable about it. He was so reasonable I nearly agreed with him out of politeness, and I have been doing this for 30 years. "On what grounds?" "No standing, no pack, alone with the fair copy. He's not wrong on any point of fact, that's the beauty of it. He doesn't need a lie, he's got the truth arranged in a helpful direction." Pelin's rings caught the candle. "And he mentioned a scribe, a tall one, ink on his cuffs apparently, and a mouth on him. Skell would like that scribe dismissed as well." "Would he?" "He would." Pelin looked at me for a while. "He is the only wolf alive who looks at me the way a man looks at another man. Emeric. I have watched you go down that stair for 19 years, and I have never once said a word against it, because it works, and because a king who hears nothing is a king who signs anything. But you have been down here 6 nights. There's a clause." "I know there's a clause. I've read the clause. You sent me the clause at midnight in a hand I've never seen you use, and I have spent 2 days pouring wine into that dreadful northern boy to find out how long they've been building it, and the answer is since the spring, and you were right." He said it flatly. "You were right, and it saves the pass, and it came out of this room, so I am not saying come upstairs. I'm saying I have known you since you were 9 years old, and you have never in your life laughed where I could hear it, and I heard you laugh through the floor of my own office on Tuesday. The candle did what candles do." "There's an oath in 2 days," I said. "There is. And on the day of it, a man in a good coat is going to walk out to the head of that hall." "He is," Pelin said, "and she's going to be standing below the salt with a page in her hand, and she is going to look up." He let that sit exactly as long as it needed to sit. "Tell her tonight." "If I tell her tonight, I lose her." "You'll lose her worse on Thursday." "If I tell her tonight," I said, "she stops. That's what I mean, not that she leaves, that she stops. She's the only wolf in this building who has ever told me I was wrong to my face, and the reason she can do it is that she doesn't know whose face it is. The moment she knows, she'll round the edges. Everyone rounds the edges, Pelin. You round the edges." "I do," he agreed without a flicker. "I've rounded them for 30 years, and it's why you've got a kingdom and no friends. That's not an argument, Majesty. That's a confession, and you've dressed it up as strategy, and it's very well tailored, and I'm too old to admire the stitching." He pushed himself off the door. "She corrected your work, not the crown's yours. She's the only person who's ever done it, and you're going to repay her by letting her find out in front of 600 wolves." He went up the stair. He is very light for a heavy man. He always has been. I sat there until the candle went out, and then I sat there in the dark, which is a thing kings can afford to do. And at some point, I understood that Pelin Ord had walked down 2 flights of stairs at 2 in the morning not to talk about a clause at all. I did not tell her. I want to be exact about the cost of that, because I have had years to be inexact about it, and I've noticed it gets easier every time. The 5th day was the finest day of my life to that point. That is the cost, not the shame afterward, the fineness. We had the northern draft and the southern draft laid end to end on the long table like 2 halves of a bridge that did not meet, and we went through them line by line from dawn, and by noon we had found the second one. She found it. I want that recorded too. I had the 4th clause because she'd handed it to me. The 9th she pulled out of the southern text herself while eating an orange she had certainly not been given. "They've done it twice," she said with her mouth full. "Twice. Varthur in the north, and here." She turned the southern sheet around, the beautiful sloping southern hand, all those honeyed letters leaning like grass in wind. "En Sovradanza, which is even prettier. It means under the good watch of. Look at it. It's a lullaby. It's the word you'd use for a nurse and a sleeping child, and you cannot possibly object to it without looking like a man who is objecting to nurses. And in the old form. In the old form it's the same root as Vartha." She put the orange down. "It's the same word, sir. It went north and it went south and it came back with 2 accents, and both of them are standing in this treaty holding hands." The room went on around us, the northern clerks chopping wood, the southern scribes at their beautiful crawl, the boy mending pens. "They're not rivals," she said slowly, watching it arrive in her own head as she said it. "Everyone in this building has spent 6 months arranging chairs so that Ostwald doesn't have to sit near Sarnholt, and they've agreed. They agreed in the spring. They've come here to argue with each other in front of you, loudly, all week, about tolls and precedents and 40 casks of wine. And the whole time both drafts have been quietly saying the same thing in 2 languages, which is that the road belongs to whoever is minding it for somebody." "Yes," I said. She looked up sharply. "You knew." "I worked it out on the 2nd day." "And you didn't say." "Who would I have said it to?" I asked. "I'm a scribe." She opened her mouth. She shut it. And then she laughed the first time I ever heard it, a short, surprised sound, more air than voice, and put her face in her hands. "This kingdom is held together by 4 coppers a day and a man with ink on his coat," she said. "God help the pass." "God help the pass," I agreed. We worked until the light went. Somewhere in the middle of the afternoon, Marrow fell asleep sitting up and we let him. Somewhere after that, the boy brought us bread that was not the head scribe's, having gone out and bought it with his own money, which I noticed and have not forgotten, and which is why that boy is now the keeper of the rolls of Korand and has a house. And somewhere in the long blue hour before supper, with both drafts marked and the 9th clause bleeding red ink, she sat back and rubbed her eyes and said, "They'll pull it, you know, when they see the ugly word tomorrow. Skell will see Ostanrath in the fair copy and he'll know we've read them, and he'll pull the whole thing off the table and go home, and Sarnholt will go home, and everybody will say the summit failed, and in 18 months they'll be back with a better draft and a worse mood. They won't pull it." "Why not?" "Because they've spent 6 months and 300 wolves and 40 casks of wine getting here," I said, "and because Havard of Ostwald cannot afford to walk home from a small kingdom empty-handed while Corvin Sarn watches him do it. They're not partners, they're conspirators, and conspirators can't be seen to lose to a toll gate. They'll swallow the word. They'll swallow it in front of each other and hate it and swear it anyway, because the only thing worse than a bad clause is going home to a hall full of wolves who wanted a road." She was quiet for a moment. "That's," she said, "that is very cynical." "It's very Korand," I said. "We're 4 miles wide, cynicism is our only mountain." "How do you know that?" And there it was, sitting on the table between us with its ugly jaw open. "I read a great deal," I said. She looked at me, gray eyes, the smudge on her jaw, the braid coming apart. She looked at me for 1 heartbeat longer than the answer deserved, and I saw her decide not to believe it exactly, to let it stand. The way she never let a word stand, not once in 6 nights except that once. "That is the moment," If anyone ever asks me, and my wife has asked me more than once, generally at a moment calculated for maximum effect, that is the moment I would take back. Not the coat, the heartbeat. You read a great deal, she repeated. I've had a dull life, she said, and turned back to the page and did not ask again. And I understood then that she had known something was wrong since roughly the third night, and had decided not to look at it, because looking at it might end the 6 nights, and she wanted them too. That is the closest either of us came to honesty before Thursday, and it was done entirely in silence, by 2 people who make their living out of words. The bond found me that night properly, and it did not do it kindly. I had gone up at last, the 2nd hour, my own corridor, my own door, the good coat waiting on its stand like a man standing in the corner of the room. I had not slept in the good bed for 5 nights. I had been dozing on a bench with my head against a bookshelf like a clerk, and my back informed me of this at length. And I lay down and shut my eyes and heard, quite clearly in the dark, in a voice with no give in it at all. "Ah, Stanreth." My wolf turned its head. I have tried since to describe this to men who have felt it and men who haven't, and neither group is satisfied. The mated men want the surge, the strike, the fire, the thing that goes through you at a feast and knocks the cup out of your hand. They have it in their songs. My grandfather had it, apparently, in a snowfield, and it made him a very tiresome man for the rest of his life. Mine turned its head. That's all. 6 nights running, and by that 5th night I could no longer hear my own name in my own head without hers arriving underneath it, the way a bell in the lower town arrives underneath the bell in the upper, same note, half a breath late, and once you have heard the 2 of them you cannot ever again hear the one alone. The thing a wolf will not let go of even when the jaw is broken. She had said it about a road. I lay in the dark in a house I had held for 19 years, and understood that I had at last, in my 38th year, found the one thing on the continent I could not negotiate for. You cannot make an offer. There is no clause. She was 4 coppers a day and no pack, and she had told me I would die of my habits. And she was right, and the whole apparatus of my kingdom. The chancellor, the bells, the 411 household wolves, the grandmother's plate, was not worth 1 hour of a copying room at midnight with a woman blotting her own cuff. I got up before dawn and went down. She was already there. Of course she was. Boots still on, hair still coming apart, working by a candle she had lit off the last of last night's candle, which is a thing only a poor woman knows how to do. "You look terrible," she said. "I've been thinking." "Don't," she said. "It's Wednesday." Wednesday, the day before the oath. That was the day it nearly came apart. Skell moved at the 9th hour, and he moved beautifully. And I have thought since that if Ostwald had made that man an envoy instead of a clerk, they would own the pass, and I would be dead in a ditch. He did not come to the copying room. He went to the hall, to the summit itself, to the high table, with both delegations sitting and Pellin in the great chair, and he raised, with enormous courtesy, a procedural point. He said that Ostwald had noticed certain emendations in the Korand fair copy of a form, agreed in the spring. He said that Ostwald made no accusation whatever. He said only that a treaty sworn in the old form is sworn in a tongue that none of the 3 delegations speaks, and that Korand's rendering rested, as he understood it, on the reading of a single hired interpreter with no pack and no standing, engaged by the day, and that Ostwald, in the spirit of the summit, would feel more comfortable, and would be able to advise King Havard more warmly if the oath were sworn instead in the market form, which every wolf in the room understood, and which would spare everyone the awkwardness of binding 2 kingdoms to a dead language on the word of a hired girl. It was perfect. I heard it from the gallery with my heart going like a hammer, and I could have applauded. Because it was not a lie, every word of it was true. And the market form would have taken the ugly word and boiled it down to keeping, and put us back exactly where we were on Sunday night, and the pass would have been gone by supper, sold in a language everyone understood. And Corvin Sarn, from the far end of the table, said, in that warm southern voice, "The northern gentleman is quite right, of course. It seems a great deal to hang on one girl." Both of them, in front of each other, agreeing. Pellin Ord did not look up at the gallery. That is worth 30 years of chancellorship all on its own. He did not look up. He did not so much as move his eyes. He sat there with his rings on his belly, and he said, "The old form has been sworn at Marin Gate for 11 generations, my lords. It's sworn in the old tongue because the old tongue is what the mountain speaks. If the crown of Corend were to swear the road away in Market Pigeon, my own grandmother would come out of the wall and eat me. He smiled his fat provincial smile. And I'd deserve it. The oath stands as it stands. Corend will render it. Corend has always rendered it. Rendered by whom? Said Skell. By the crown's interpreter, said Pellin. By the hired tongue, said Skell. By the crown's interpreter, Pellin repeated comfortably, who is engaged by the day, as all Corend's interpreters are engaged, because Corend is a poor kingdom and cannot keep 6 scholars in velvet. If Ostwald would care to endow a chair, we'd be delighted. Some laughter in the wrong places, which is what Pellin wanted. But I'd remind the northern gentleman that the crown chooses its own tongue, at its own table, in its own gate. Or is it Ostwald's suggestion that Corend's oath should be spoken by an Ostwald mouth? And Skell, who had built this for 6 months, who had come within one polite sentence of it, had to say, in front of Corvin Sarn, that Ostwald suggested no such thing. There it is. That is the whole of statecraft, and it took 30 seconds, and it was won by a fat old man who could not have told you what Ostanrath meant if you had held his own name to his throat. I went down the back stair with my ears roaring. She was at the long table with her head bent over the binding form, marking her breath stops in the margin, because the old form must be spoken in 1 breath per clause, or it does not bind, and she had been drilling it since dawn like a woman rehearsing a hanging. They tried to have you thrown out, I said. I know, she said, without looking up. The boy ran down. I'd have done the same in Skell's place. It's the only move he had left. I'd have made it on Monday myself. He waited too long because he thought I didn't matter. She marked a stop. That was his mistake. It's everyone's mistake. It's a very convenient mistake, and I've made a living out of it. Avalanche. Something in it stopped her hand. She looked up. And whatever was on my face, and I do not know what was on my face. I had not slept, and I had spent 5 hours in the dark listening to a bell arrive underneath a bell. It took the tiredness off hers all at once, the way it had that first night when I laughed. What? She said. Tell her. The room was empty. Marrow was at his dinner. The boy was upstairs. There was 1 candle and 2 draughts and a woman with ink to the 2nd knuckle, and there would never, for the rest of my life, be a better moment than that one, and I have known it every day since. Tomorrow, I said, when you stand up in that hall. I'll be fine. You'll be alone. I'm always alone, she said. That's the job. 600 wolves and 1 page. She said it without any weight at all, which is how you can tell a thing is load-bearing. It's not the worst thing. Nobody watches the tongue. They watch the king. I'll say the ugly word and the mountain will hold, and nobody in that room will remember my face by Friday, and I'll be paid 4 coppers and go to Sarnholt in the spring, and in 40 years some clerk will find the fair copy and think a very confident man saved the pass. She dipped her pen. They ought to know it was you, I said. Sir, she said gently, and it was the gentlest thing she ever said to me in that coat. Nobody knows it's anybody. That's what a kingdom is. It's a great many people doing the right thing where it doesn't show. She marked her next stop. Go and sleep. You're no use to me, Gray. I went up the stair, and I stood in my own corridor in front of the good coat on its stand. And I did not sleep. And at some hour that had no name I did something I have never told my counsel and have told my wife twice. I took the coat off the stand and I looked at it, and then I put it back, and I went down and slept on the bench with my head against the bookshelf, in a room with a woman drilling a dead language across the table, and it was the last night of the best week of my life, and I knew that too. At the 4th hour she said, out of nowhere without looking up, You'll be there tomorrow. I'll be there. Good, she said. Stand where I can see you. I'll want one face in that hall that isn't waiting for me to be wrong. And I said yes. Thursday came up cold and clear, which is how the past does everything. They rang the bells at dawn, all 9 of them, the upper and the lower, and if you have never heard Marringate ring, you have not heard my kingdom. It goes down the switchbacks and comes back off the far ridge half a minute later, so the whole mountain answers itself. Corend has no army worth the name. We have bells. 11 generations of envoys have ridden up that road and been told by 9 bronze mouths exactly how small they are. The hall filled at the 8th hour. Ostwald Grey on the north side, Sarnholt Gold on the south, and between them my 411, and behind them the townsmen and the toll clerks and the bell wardens and the goodwives of Marin, 600 wolves and more. Because an oath at the gate is a public thing and always has been, that is the point of it, that is why the mountain speaks. The oath table stood at the head under the 9th bell, 2 chairs for the great packs, 1 chair for Corand. And below the salt at the low end, with a page in her hand and her braid done up properly for once. A woman in a clean gray dress that was not hers, borrowed from somebody's sister, standing alone. I watched her from behind the arras with my heart going. She was looking for me. I could see her doing it, that flick of the eyes along the wall where the scribes stand once, twice, the small crease coming in between her brows when the ink-stained coat was not in it. Pelin Ord touched my elbow. "Majesty," he said, "they're waiting." And he held out the good coat.